Imagine a world where knights in shining armor are not just figures in fairy tales, but real, living warriors who ride into battle on heavily armored horses. This was the world of the 14th century, a time of chivalry, where kings and nobles fought for glory and territory. But on August 26, 1346, at a place called Crecy in northern France, something unexpected happened that would change the course of history forever. In the summer of 1346, King Edward III of England was determined to claim the throne of France. He set sail with a massive army, including his young son Edward, the Prince of Wales, who was only 15 years old. The English fleet landed in Normandy, a wealthy and prosperous region of France. They were guided by Godfrey de Harcourt, a French nobleman who had been banished from his homeland and was eager to take revenge. The English army, consisting of 4,000 men at arms and 10,000 archers, along with Irish and Welsh foot soldiers, found Normandy to be a land ripe for the taking. The people of Normandy, unused to war, fled their homes, leaving behind their wealth and livestock. The English soldiers plundered and burned towns, gathering vast amounts of loot. They moved through the countryside, causing chaos and destruction wherever they went. One of the first major towns they attacked was Caen, which was unwalled and thus vulnerable. The town's people and a small force of French knights put up a brave defense, but they were no match for the well-organized English army. The English captured many prisoners, including the Constable of France, the Comte d'Eu. These prisoners were sent back to England to be held for ransom, which would later have tragic consequences. As the English army advanced, King Philip VI of France, who had been slow to respond, finally gathered a large force to confront them. He followed the English along the other side of the Seine River, eventually re-entering Paris as the English reached Poissy, just 20 miles from the city. The sight of the English army burning and pillaging the surrounding villages filled the citizens of Paris with fear and amazement. King Philip issued a general summons, known as the Arriere Ban, calling all able-bodied men to arms. This was a last resort measure, used only when the usual calls to the nobility were not enough. The summons was proclaimed by heralds in marketplaces and villages, and individual letters were sent to towns and abbeys, requisitioning money and troops. However, the response was not as strong as Philip had hoped. Many towns paid their service in money, which allowed the hiring of mercenaries, while others sent small, poorly trained contingents of foot soldiers. The French army, despite its size, was a mix of different groups with varying levels of training and motivation. The knights, who were the elite of the army, were well armored and trained, but the common foot soldiers were often poorly equipped and untrained. The French also relied on Genoese crossbowmen, who were skilled but slow to reload their weapons. On the other hand, the English army was well disciplined and had a secret weapon, the longbow. The English archers were highly trained and could shoot arrows with incredible speed and accuracy. They could rain down a storm of arrows on their enemies, causing chaos and confusion. The longbow was a game-changer, and the English had learned to use it effectively in their wars with the Scots. The Battle of Crécy began on August 26, 1346, when the French army caught up with the English. King Edward, realizing he would have to fight, chose a strong defensive position on a hill above the village of Crecy. The French, despite their numbers, were disorganized and lacked a clear plan. The French knights, eager to prove their bravery, charged uphill without waiting for the crossbowmen to soften the English lines. The Genoese crossbowmen, tired from the long march and with wet bowstrings, were unable to effectively engage the enemy. When they tried to retreat, the French knights, seeing them as cowards, attacked and killed many of them. The English archers, with their dry bowstrings and superior training, unleashed a hail of arrows that cut down the French knights and their horses. The disciplined English line held firm, and the French attacks were repeatedly repelled. The English knights then advanced on foot, supported by archers and pikemen, and finished off the fallen French soldiers. The battle continued into the night, with the French suffering heavy losses. Among the dead were some of the most prominent figures of French chivalry, including the king's brother, the Count d'Alençon, and the Count of Flanders. King John the Blind of Bohemia, a legendary warrior, also died in the battle. His son, Charles of Bohemia, managed to escape, but the loss of so many noble leaders was a devastating blow to the French army. King Philip VI, who had been wounded, was eventually led away from the battlefield by the Count of Hainault. The Battle of Crécy marked a turning point in the 100 Years' War. The English victory demonstrated the power of the longbow and the importance of disciplined, well-trained foot soldiers. It also exposed the weaknesses of the French feudal system, where the nobility often acted on their own and lacked a unified command structure. The Battle of Crécy was not just a military victory for the English. It was a cultural and social shift. The age of the knight, once the dominant force on the battlefield, was coming to an end. The future belonged to the common soldier, trained and equipped with effective weapons like the longbow. The Battle of Crécy showed that even the most noble and well-armored knights could be defeated by a well-organized and disciplined army. In the years that followed, the English continued to use the tactics they had perfected at Crecy, and the French struggled to adapt. The 100 Years' War would drag on for many more years, but the lessons of Crecy would not be forgotten. The world of chivalry and knights in shining armor was changing, and the future belonged to those who could adapt to the new ways of war.